Welcome to August Q&A edition of the Never Told to Live podcast. Now, quick apology, I was intending to do this live as I usually do on the first Wednesday of every month. So last Wednesday that was supposed to happen, but due to some childcare issues that wasn't possible. But I did have questions come in and I still wanted to address those and make sure I didn't miss the session. So I'm now putting it out as this recorded episode. So the questions that we're going to cover today are a little bit about a tempo that we perform exercises at and why we might want to consider some different options. A little bit about protein and creatine and the dosage that you might want to use. Then I had a little bit about the split squat exercise and choosing depth versus adding weight as an option to progress with that. We had a little bit about the gait or carry exercises and what we might want to consider a repetition in that, or how long do we do it for? Is it distance? Is it the time? Then the last one was a question about coming back from injury to one side of the body, so one knee or one ankle, etc., and how we adapt and progress our exercises, knowing that we've got both sides at different levels. So going straight into that first question, when doing bench presses or other heavy exercise, do you control the lowering of the barbell by slowly doing it over 3 to 4 seconds and push explosively upwards? Or is there a better option? So it's a really great question, and something not everyone considers is a tempo to perform the exercises at. They tend to just focus on the number of repetitions, sets, and the weight they use. But tempo is another great way that you can add a different variable in to change the outcome of the exercise you're performing without having to have too much impact on how much weight you're lifting. If you are at the very beginner stages, then I wouldn't worry too much about this. This is something that you can kind of add on a little bit later. But if you've been starting to use weights for a while and you're confident with the exercises and you want a little bit more of a challenge and you don't have too much more weight to add on to it, or you felt that kind of plateau happen and you just feel like mixing it up slightly to give yourself a new challenge, then playing with the tempo can be a brilliant way of doing that. And as this person describes, if we're lowering slowly over 3 to 4 seconds, that lowering phase of an exercise, we call that the eccentric phase. Whereas they're coming back up again, and if they're going for the bench press, it's that pushing back up to the ceiling, that is the concentric phase. So they've broken it into two sections there. The eccentric phase of training is actually where you need to be a lot stronger in that lowering phase. The muscle needs to be stronger to make that happen than you do actually in the lifting phase. And the reason for that is when we're doing an exercise concentrically, so an easy option or way of looking at that is a bicep curl. If my bicep contracts, it pulls the arm up and that weight up towards my shoulder. The eccentric phase is that lowering phase. So it's coming down, but it's having to work to stop the weight just falling. So it's trying to contract to stop the fall, but it's also lengthening at the same time. And it's trying to find that balance between how much does it lengthen while still contracting. And that is a lot harder work for the muscle to kind of coordinate that to happen. And if we're then lowering over a longer period of time, over say 3 to 4 seconds in this case that they described, whereas we might normally do it over a second or two, we're increasing what we call the time under tension for that exercise. And the longer the muscle is working under tension, the longer it is working for. So therefore it's a harder, more fatiguing, taxing effort for that muscle to perform. And it also ensures that you're not using momentum to skip through any part of the movement. So some people do that with the bench press. They almost sort of drop the weight and catch it just above them again to then drive back up. Whereas if you know you're slowly doing it over time, at no point is momentum carrying you sort of through a certain range of motion. And therefore it's taxing the muscle throughout its whole length. So that's a really sort of fatiguing, taxing way to challenge a muscle in a new way. And then this person talks about, rather than just coming up slowly in the same fashion, maybe trying to do an explosive push back up again. And that's actually quite smart because whilst you could do it slow and increase the time under tension for the concentric phase, that lifting phase, by doing it explosively, we're also adding in an element of power. So that's the ability for the muscle to produce the strength it's got in a quicker period of time. And actually, as we age, we tend to lose power more quickly than we lose strength. So whilst I think it's a great addition, is adding that speed and power into it, if you're not familiar with the exercise yet and you have much kind of experience performing that exercise with heavier weights, then it's not something I'll go into first. Because again, we need to build the strength first in order to be access that strength quickly. Whereas if you're trying to access the strengths you haven't got yet quickly, that could be a recipe for causing yourself an injury. So again, it's not the first place that I would start, but it's certainly something I would try and add in. And for anyone who's a bit more experienced and has got past the beginner stage, it's a next step I tend to add in with people, is that adding the explosive nature of the exercise in. A quick caveat in terms of the bench press element of that. If you're on your own and you're doing this with a barbell, it's incredibly surprising how tough and exhausting it is for the muscles to slow down the eccentric phase over 3 to 4 seconds whilst adding in that power phase. And whilst you might normally manage a certain weight with, say, 12 repetitions with relative ease, it might be that you suddenly hit the fatigue point at 9 repetitions. And if you get stuck at the bottom with a barbell and you're on your own, that's quite dangerous. So if you're on your own, I'll be doing this with dumbbells. If you're in the gym, making sure there's someone around who could spot you, or is at least very close on hand to help if you need anything. But yeah, if there's any questions from anyone watching this about that, please do email me. It's chris@nevertoldtolift.com. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, then please leave a comment below and I will get back to you with that. Equally, if you've got any other questions and you want to sort of have that featured on next month's live Q&A session, so it's the first Wednesday of every month, then please, again, send questions through, comment on YouTube, or leave me an email, chris@nevertoldtolift.com. The next question that came in was, there is a lot across social media about creatine and over 60s requiring at least 2 grams of protein for muscle growth. What's your thoughts on this? So I need to start with caveat that I am a physiotherapist. I'm not a nutritionist, and it's kind of beyond my scope of practice. However, in episode 3 of the Never Talk to Lift podcast, I had on Katrina Courtney, who she talked all about how to fuel your body as an older adult, particularly someone who is interested in strength and resistance training and being a bit more active. And she covered in great depth about protein, creatine, as well as a lot of other topics. So if you haven't listened to that, I do recommend going to listen to episode 3. I will put the link to that into the comments below if you're on YouTube, or onto the show notes page if you are listening to this on audio and you want to find that later. So it's nevertoldtolift.com/podcast 003, and you'll find that there. What I thought I'd do was just take a second to just give a brief summary of what Katrina mentioned about protein and creatine on that podcast episode. What she said about protein, to start with, was that we should actually be getting between 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So she said that's roughly 100 grams for someone who weighs about 70 kilograms. And that's actually double the current recommended daily allowance, which only represents the minimum to actually prevent deficiency. It's not kind of what the most optimal is. She also talked a bit about the quality of the protein. And she said if you can find the particular amino acid called leucine that is covered within the protein you're taking, then that is one that we really want to try and include in there and going to have better effects for triggering protein synthesis. So she was saying what we want to try and do is aim for 7 grams of leucine per day. So she said that might be 3 to 4 large eggs. That's about 2 grams of leucine in there. 100 grams of chicken breast might be about 2.5 grams of leucine. And a 30-gram serving of whey protein has got, again, 2 grams in there. She did say plant sources have about 50% less leucine. And sort of beans had 0.5 to 0.7 grams per 100 grams. So again, we've got the whole protein sort of allowance, the 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. But yeah, if we can aim for about 7 grams of leucine within that protein, that's kind of what we're looking for there. She also said about the timings of protein, and she talked a little bit about the myths there and actually what the more recent research is showing us. So we used to think we had this particular window that we used to try to get our protein in within 30 minutes of a workout. And she said, actually, there's less evidence around that now. And actually that window is closer to actually sort of 24 to 48 hours. And it's more about your daily average protein intake that it matters rather than precise timing following a workout or even before a workout. And don't get too fixated on that. As long as you're meeting your daily guidelines and your daily targets, that is going to have the biggest impact. She said it's easier to achieve targets by spreading across 3 to 4 meals rather than one large serving. And she said, actually, if you can focus improving your breakfast and lunch intakes for protein, that is going to have the biggest impact, because most people's dinner is adequate in their protein intake, but it's the breakfast and lunch that tends to be falling short. Then we come on to creatine, and she reassured us that creatine is a naturally occurring amino acid protein produced in the liver and found in muscle tissue. It's not a steroid or anything similar, as a lot of people fear and therefore then don't take. So with the dosage, she recommends trying to get in 5 grams daily consistently, and it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to build up to kind of the adequate stores that we want in there. Just like protein, she said the timing is more about daily consistency over the kind of trying to fit that 5 grams in per day rather than specific timing. And as long as you're hitting your daily target, you'll be 90% of the way there. We can take it in the form of sort of plain creatine powder. You don't need to go for the fancy versions that have the added ingredients in. And she said the people that are going to benefit from the most are women who just naturally have lower creatine stores, vegetarian athletes, since creatine is mainly found in meat, sort of the muscle that we eat from meat. So by adding creatine supplementation into a vegetarian's diet, that can have a big impact. And then she said it's brilliant for older adults doing resistance training. She also said there is some research that said it might help preserve bone mineral density, particularly in postmenopausal women, and it has emerging evidence for cognitive benefits too, especially related to sleep and stress stress and sleep deprivation. So bottom line is, she said, it is well researched, it is very safe, and it can provide that kind of 1 to 2% performance improvement when you combine that with regular consistent training. But if you want any more detail on that, then please, again, do go listen to episode 3 of the Never Toil to Lift podcast with Katrina Courtney. And it's a long episode, about an hour, but it's a deep dive into not just protein and creatine, but any questions that I had come in to me from the Never Toil to Lift audience about nutrition related to strength training as an older adult. And it's not just about the top end performers, it's about anyone who's just new to strength training, getting into it and just trying to take some of those myths and dispel them and just clarify some of the noise you hear out there. So it's the most listened to episode so far, and for good reason. So do go and have a listen to that. And once again, I'll put that in the links of the show notes or the links into the description on YouTube if you're watching on there. Then the next question that came in was related to the split squat exercise. So that's that kind of lunge-based exercise, but rather than step into the lunge, you start with your feet in place and then just trying to lower your back knee as close to the floor as you can and then stand back up again. And the question was, I'm not reaching the floor with my split squats. So they weren't reaching their back knee to the floor with a split squat, but I've added a 3-pound weight. And she says, I know, puny, but it's more than my body weight. And I'm using a pillow rather than going all the way to the floor. Is it more important to go to the floor, or is it more important to increase weight? And my question would have been, if I was speaking directly to the person, what stops you getting to the floor? Is there knee pain in the lower depths of the split squat? Or is it that they lack the strength and the control in the lower range? Or is it the balance that they keep losing? They tend to be the 3 things that limit people on the split squat. So I had a couple of pointers in each of those. If we come back to that pain one, a lot of people find that there's a certain depth that is really uncomfortable for their knee, particularly the back knee, as they're trying to lower the back knee down to the floor. What I do with my patients in the clinic, particularly those suffering with arthritis in the knee, is to find their threshold depth of where the pain is just starting to become noticeable, but we're not working into any grimacing pain or anything that lingers once they finish. And then once we've worked out where that depth is, I often, in the clinic, I use these 2-inch Pilates blocks and power them up so that they can get down to that depth to touch their knee to it and then back up again. So rather than touching it to the floor, they're finding that. So often people have books at home that they can use. This person's using a pillow. Something that if you found you got caught at the lowest point and you didn't have the strength to get back up, that is a safety net that you can drop down to if you need to. And it also is that guide. If you tap it every time, you know you've gone to the same depth every time and you haven't just been getting sort of shorter and shorter and cheating yourself of a centimetre here or there in the last few reps. Now, in that comfortable range of motion that you've found, what you can start to do, and what I suggest people do, is add weight to that. Like this person started with £3, which they shouldn't belittle that. That's great to start getting used to doing a tough exercise with some weight. And then if that feels comfortable, it's just adding a bit more weight on. And people often find you can add quite a little bit more weight on than you think in that comfortable range and never cross the threshold back into the pain in the knee, whether grimacing pain or lingering pain. And if you're then working on that for several weeks, trying to increase the weight that you're using over time and sticking with the same depth, after a month or two, what you tend to find you can do is actually reduce the weight back down again, take out some of the Pilates blocks or whatever you're using to limit your range of motion. And you often find you can actually now explore deeper depths than you could before without experiencing pain because of the strength you've built in that the shallower range of motion. You've still been building some muscle strength, and that muscle strength is going to help support you in those lower depth regions and change maybe the dynamics of how the knee was working, so it's now not painful anymore. And I've had a lot of people who've come in, only been able to do kind of half the depth, and over the space of a couple of months, 3 months, have been able to get to the floor whilst holding a heavier weight than they ever could have done before, and even the half depth. So that's the route I tend to take, is add weight in the comfortable range first and then explore the deeper depths. Little trick with the balance, if the balance is more the limiting factor, is most people with the split squat tend to, if you imagine a train track, they tend to have both feet in line with each other. So effectively, just both feet are on one sort of track of the train track. Whereas actually it should still be similar to if we were doing a squat, is our feet are kind of on either side of the tracks. And we're still the same, just one foot is slightly further ahead of the other, rather than both being sit in line with each other, because you've got a narrower base of support and it's a lot harder to balance yourself. So think about train tracks when you're doing a split squat or a lunge, and try and keep each foot on a separate track rather than crossing over and having them both on the same track. Then the next question is, how far should the farmer's walk be? Around the track at the gym, 5 to 6 round trips at the living room? What should I be doing? Now, for anyone who's not familiar, farmer's walk is, or we've also got the suitcase carry or something similar, is part of the gait and carry exercise or movement pattern. And any exercise where you're holding a weight and walking across a room at the same time, and that kind of replicates maybe if you were holding a wheelbarrow full of weight and then trying to walk forwards. The suitcase carry is pretty self-explanatory. It's the same as if you're carrying a suitcase in one hand. So the weight of the suitcase is trying to pull you down to the sides. You're having to work additional muscles to help keep yourself upright. Now, when you're doing something like a squat, it's easy to count the number of repetitions you're doing. And there's quite clear guidelines on, and I talk about this, about trying to reach initially fatigue within 15 repetitions, but over time, you're going to try and get that closer to 5 repetitions to get the last one that you do to be pretty much the last one you could have managed. And that's where the strength is really built. With the farmer's carry, and you're taking steps, but it's not really the steps at the tough bit. It's the kind of the body's reaction to holding the weight and the fatigue that kicks in, that is is the bit that's challenging about this exercise. So the number of steps you take isn't really, it doesn't correlate with 15 steps being the same as 15 reps of a squat. And then the different size rooms that you might be working in can be quite challenging. And for me, I try to say, don't get too hung up on the distance. I would say if you can aim for somewhere between 20 to 30 seconds of doing the exercise, where towards the end or somewhere within 20 to 38 seconds of that exercise, you're starting to feel it harder to maintain the control, and you're starting to lean with the posture, and you're fixing with other muscles, and it feels like a real effort to do, then you've got that spot on. If it was taking you over a minute to get to that point, you probably haven't gotten heavy enough. And if you could barely do 10 seconds because the weight was so heavy, then it's probably too heavy and you need to get a little bit lighter. Again, in the gym that I work in, I tend to do 4 lengths of that at a nice sort of slow controlled pace. So again, it's a bit like coming back to that first question, the tempo of the exercise. We want a nice controlled walking pattern rather than a very quick walking pattern. So it's clearly the pace you do this at will change how many lengths or round trips of a living room you might be doing. But if you try and slow it down, you increase the muscles' time under tension, and you're looking for somewhere between 20 to 30 seconds, that would be my recommendation on this. But as long as same with all the exercises, as long as you're trying to get to a point where you're feeling like it's challenging to do the exercise right at the end of your target time, then you will be getting some strength from this, and you will then feel the improvements the more you consistently do this exercise. Just before we come on to the final question, I just wanted to remind people that if you are looking to get started with strength training and you're just not too sure where to start, if there's a lot of noise out there and it's quite overwhelming, and you just want to come up with a bit of a plan yourself, but know that you're doing the right thing and not just rely on a YouTube video here or there where you can't always do all the exercises, then I've got a completely free ebook that you can download. So if you just go to nevertooldtolift.com/ebook, and again, I'll put that in the description below or in the show notes, you'll find where you can access that for, let's say, completely free. And it's just going to guide you through all the theory that you need to put together a plan that's going to suit your ability level, suit any conditions you might have and you're worried about flaring up, etc., and help give you a template to put those exercises into and how you can progress going forwards. Say that has helped a lot of people take those first steps that they need to get started with strength training. So again, nevertooldtolift.com/ebook, or check the description and you'll find that there. But the last question I often have, particularly working as my role as a physiotherapist in the clinic, is I'm coming back from an injury to one knee. I feel confident to start training again. Should I just train one knee, or really focus on that one knee I'm trying to get stronger and back to the previous level again? Or should I be strengthening the other one too? And the common fear with strengthening the other leg, the good leg throughout all this, is that if that is getting stronger at the same time the weak one's getting stronger, you're creating more of an imbalance. And people are scared of kind of this imbalance going forward. So they tend to not really challenge their good leg, the sort of non-affected leg. And they just focus on the previously injured leg, or the one that's just coming back from injury, and we're taking that step to resume training again. So I just wanted to kind of give my opinion on this quickly. Of a lot of things happen, or a loss of muscle mass tends to be a bit of a precursor for a lot of injuries to happen, or it's an increased risk factor for some of these injuries to happen in the first place. A loss of muscle strength can also be associated with increased symptoms of arthritis. So it's not a direct correlation that the more arthritis you have, or the more arthritic changes you have, that the more pain you're in. I see plenty of people in the clinic that have a really painful knee and a not painful knee at all, and when they get them x-ray, the really painful one looks pretty good on x-ray, and the one that they don't feel any pain in is kind of at the severe stage of arthritis. Yet that's not painful, and that is quite a common pattern. And arthritic changes can often mean that you're slightly more prone to a flare-up of symptoms, but those symptoms can calm down again. But I'm just digressing slightly. The point is that a loss of muscle strength can be associated with more symptomatic arthritis. And the fact that we have had the problem they came in with in the first place, a loss of muscle strength is probably associated with it somewhere. It's maybe not the main contributing factor, but it's probably a contributing factor. So if both were already previously weak, and then we've had the injury or the complaint, and now over time, because of the recovery period, that's a lot weaker. If we start working on building strength on the affected leg, which we should, as we push back up, we generally know or feel like we're there when left equals right, and we're back to where we were. But if we're only working this leg and we're not challenging this leg at all, what tends to happen is that actually drops slightly as this one rises. And actually, we left equals right. So we think we're there, but actually both are slightly weaker than they were before. And given that they're both probably weaker than they should have been before, we're now well short of where we should be. So what we want to try and do is, if we focus on trying to build strength in the affected leg, but at the same time really push the non-affected leg and really challenge that, we get two benefits from it. Is one, we really we push that up. So we've now given the affected leg a better target to try and catch up to. So eventually it's going to come up here, and they're both stronger than when we started. Also, there's something we call the cross-educational effect. So if we are strengthening a good leg, it reminds the bad leg or that affected leg how it should be working. It's kind of reminding the brain the most effective way of using the muscle strength it's trying to build in the affected leg. And you often see that you can get quicker results if you're pushing the stronger leg at the same time. So that would be my take, is don't hold back on the good leg just because you think you need to get the weaker leg to match that first and then build it. You're just holding the good leg back for no reason. I would be working on both at the same time and try and build those separately to then meet at some point, which you can then start those exercises where we're trying to build both legs at the same time. But again, any questions on that, or any follow-on questions from that answer, or any of the answers I've given today, then please do comment below with those questions. Equally, if you've got a completely new question that you want me to cover in next month's Q&A in September, then please leave that in the comments below on YouTube. If you are on audio and you want to leave a question, you can either jump over to YouTube, and I suggest you probably do, because you can then always make sure you're subscribed and click the notifications bell, and then you'll always get notified when I go live for these Q&A sessions. But if not, then you can leave me an email. It's chris@nevertoldtolift.com. And then I will check and I will collate those questions and answer those in next month's Q&A. But for now, say it's been slightly delayed, this episode. So in a couple of days' time, you're going to hear from Betsy, who gives us a great talk about how she programs her group sessions for over 60s around building strength, preventing falls, so improving balance, and tailoring a workout program for their needs, and what you can include at home to sort of meet those requirements that she talks about. So it's a fascinating episode. She is really clear about what she talks about. She is really engaging, but her workout's brilliant, and I've took a lot from it, and I've started to incorporate it into the classes that I run in the clinic as well. There's a couple of bits I realized I'd overlooked in there. So yeah, don't miss that episode. That's coming out on Wednesday. But any questions, get in touch. If not, I will see you in that next episode.